Hello and welcome to this video. This video is going to ask the question, should we consider Trout Mask Replica to be a brilliant album and Captain Beefheart's crowning glory? I don't think so. But I'm not going to do this under the normal structure of one of my videos. Oh no, this is going to be a lot stranger, and it's going to reflect the sort of approach that Captain Beefheart would have to his music. I am also going to throw into the mix some of the thoughts that I had regarding this after watching the film Dead Poets Society. So those two things are going to be in there. This is going to be quite a complex video, I'm afraid. And I will do all of this while sat in a graveyard. So I hope you appreciate that cunning mix. And I hope, though I have brought you here with quite a clickbaity title and thumbnail, which is my job as a YouTuber, and I will deliver on that, that you will stick with it, and hopefully there might be a more profound sort of outcome to your thoughts if you stick to this to the end, or it might be just a load of pretentious rubbish. Who knows? You know? No. Hello and welcome to this video. It's the last few days of summer, so I thought I would get outside and do this video somewhere peaceful. So I drove around, and it's very noisy because it's the last few days of summer, everyone's out and about. So I thought, how about a graveyard? I'm that type of guy, so I'm actually sat in a graveyard at the moment. Well, I'm sat at least on the edge of a graveyard at the moment. Very big graveyard, very beautiful graveyard as well, where I thought it would be quiet, but actually next door there's a whole bunch of kids. There's some teenagers, hundreds of them, that's come down to the park as part of their sort of school thing, college thing perhaps, and they're doing some fun and games on the skateboard park there. So there's a lot of noise in the background. Now on this video I wanted to talk about Captain Beefheart, and I wanted to talk about Trout Mask Replica, which I think is another album which is really boosted up by the critics as seen as an absolute masterpiece, and I don't think it does. But I have great regard for Captain Beefheart, great regard for him. He's one of my favourite artists, so I wanted to talk about the fact that I think that album, Trout Mask Replica, is a bit of a misrepresentation of Captain Beefheart. But as I sit down, I become very aware that I am sat, you know, metaphorically between these young people that you can hear in the background. You know, I'm sat between these young people with a life ahead of them, and this here. Now life's strange in its in the way it pans out, I think. Last night my kids sat down to watch a film, and my one daughter says, she goes, I like meaningful films, can you put a meaningful film on? So as we switched Netflix on, the first film on the list was the Dead Poets Society, and so we watched that, and you could see this sort of tale of, I don't know, wealthy, upper elite middle class young men, a very sort of elite school, and all the trials and tribulations of them, you know, having some strange artsy fartsy English teacher come in and rock their world a little bit. To them seemed to be like, well, why would you even have a film like this? Because they're so used to films that have big subjects. And it didn't seem like a big enough subject, but of course as the film opens out, the message of it is incredibly powerful. Now I saw that film at the Pictures when it came out when I was young, and the thing I got from it was this idea of Carpe Diem, seize the day, you know, that your life's ahead of you and you need to to live it. It's your life. It's not someone else's life. It's your life. Set against the constraints of a sort of a generation, I suppose, at that time, that if they had wealth and power and money, believed that their children should conform to the values that got them there. I thought that's what it was about. Watching it last night, I got a lot more from it, which happens a lot with me now. I go back to these things that I think I know, and then I realise there's a lot more to it than that. Because the thing I missed was the poetry. And actually, as a theme, this has come out in the last few videos where I am considering the poetry of music and how that works, the importance of language, and that how if you obviously push the music forward, with a lot of the music we listen to here, that's been pushed forward. I think we've seen enough dead people, so you can move it back to here so I can lean against my the back of my. I've got a very strange stand. That's better, because I will be inserting a few photos here as you watch this. So, on my videos, I try to create a situation where I know what I'm about to talk about, but there's other factors in there that I don't understand, and I try and riff between the two. Now, normally, all this in the background, all these young people jumping around on their skateboards, which is what they do. Those bangs are actually the clunks of skateboards going around these sort of big metal egg cups that exist just over there. I wouldn't allow onto the video. I'm sat in very, very peaceful areas. There's lots of squirrels running around about me, and there's birds flittering. It's very, very peaceful. And the trees that they have here are absolutely beautiful. There's so many incredible trees, as you can see. All different types of trees, But what's in my head is that scene where he takes them down to see all those dead kids in the black and white photos, and he goes, Carpe Diem. And then here I am the next day, sat surrounded by, the dead, and just a few feet up from the children's graveyard, which is just in front of me. Now, there was a lovely seat there that was much more conducive to doing this video, but I didn't want to sit in it. I felt it's disrespectful. These people here, I don't feel disrespectful doing this. In fact, I feel like I've come here to where they are, and if there is any sort of if there is anything that I should think of, is that what I'm doing here is in no way disrespectful. But I couldn't have sat next to the little kids and looked out at all these, people that were around for just a year or something, and realised they didn't have the life I've had, or you've had if you're watching this. Now, lucky we are, and hopefully that these kids next door, they're going to have the same life, that they've got a future ahead of them. That's really important. I'm sat in the cusp of something, and at my age, I hope I have a good few years left, obviously, but I've lived most of my life, and those thoughts have been in my mind. What's this got to do with Trout Mask Replica and Captain Beefheart? Well, let's just have a chat about Captain Beefheart, because I've never really covered him much on my channel, have I? I haven't really covered him. So Captain Beefheart was born in 1941, and he grew up in a place called Lancaster, which also happened to be the same place, which was stuck out in the desert, a bit of a sort of cut-off place, full of a lot of kids who would sort of, ended up there because of the Air Force base that was there. Captain Beefheart was one of those kids, and so was Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart were childhood friends, and they grew up in the same area, and they both had a love for the blues, Howlin' Wolf and Guitar Slim and things like that. They loved all that. Captain Beefheart had a remarkable personality, the same as Frank Zappa. Where Frank Zappa was writing off to Edgar Varese and learning about, modern classical music, Captain Beefheart was a sculptor as a child. He would sit in his bedroom with his meals being passed under the door, I believe, and he would make sculptures of these animals which weren't like, you know, realistic. They were much more about sculpting the spirit of the animals, and little animals, little scurry little things he was interested in. And so I'm hoping as we film this that at some point a little scurrily squirrel will scurry across the background. I won't know about it because I've got my back to it, but I do hope one squirrel scurries past, because I like the idea of it inspiring a very young Captain Beefheart to, you know, to make something creative. He had a love of free jazz and jazz. He had a love of the blues. He had a love of art, sculpture, painting. And towards the end of his life, he ended up as a painter, not a musician. I find that all very interesting. He's the almost like polar opposite of Frank Zappa, similar in some ways, but the planned intellectualism and the cold sort of modernist idea of the world, Captain Beefheart wasn't like that. He was much more of a romantic in my mind, much more of a visceral musician, but his vision was as great. Throughout the 1960s, you know, he seems to emerge separate to Frank Zappa. They're not necessarily working with together at this point in time. And he has a hit with a tune called Diddy Wah Diddy. Diddy Wah Diddy, Diddy Wah. Now, I have to be honest, is that when I, as a younger man, got interested in Captain Beefheart, it was actually this tune that I absolutely loved. His voice and his understanding of like that blues growl, because you got to remember in the 1960s there was a lot of musicians trying to emulate black music, rhythm and blues and the blues and jazz and stuff like that, but the difference was in the voice. And Muddy Waters, you know, basically said this, you know, that these new kids that are playing the blues are great because they're giving, you know, shining a light on what they were doing, but the difference is in the voice, you know. And there's no way you can compare, say, I don't know, a Rod Stewart or an Eric Clapton's voice to Muddy Waters, you know, or B.B. King. But Beefheart seemed to have it in his voice, and I think it's because not just the fact that he was completely indebted to Howlin' Wolf, you could hear that was such a strong influence, but he was also a free jazz guy. He played saxophone on his records, and he's one of the most sort of freest players that I've ever heard. Now, a lot of people have a problem with free jazz, especially in the realm of rock and roll. Most normal people hearing Beefheart improvising on saxophone would probably think it's a little bit of a con, I suppose. And there is always the aspect of the charlatan and the con man hanging over Beefheart, or the eccentric who doesn't really know what he's doing. There is an aspect with Frank Zappa of the grand ringmaster, you know, standing over things, you know, almost like exploiting the creativity as musicians. His unknowing and naive musicians don't really understand what he's getting from them, and they felt a little bit, I suppose, this is a famous thing back especially in the late 60s, where Zappa's musicians felt like they'd been ripped off, a sentiment that Zappa would then turn around back into the music and utilise in this sort of grandmaster modernist ringmaster thing that he had going on. But yes, he had a local hit with Diddy Wah Diddy, which is a great tune, and then he gets a deal and he does the album Safe as Milk. Now, Safe as Milk is a work of genius. It's an absolutely brilliant album. His ideas are succinct, they're precise, but it has all the stuff in embryo that Beefheart's going to bring to music. Beefheart has a unique approach to rock and roll. He dislikes the cliches of rock and roll, but he loves the spirit. In the way that he would sculpt a squirrel, or not make it look like a squirrel, but try and sculpt the spirit of the squirrel, he takes the spirit of blues and rhythm and blues and rock and roll, and he seems to be able to sublimate that into a form that eschews any idea of a poppy beat or a hook. The music is continually shifting all the time. There's all elements of Ornette Coleman in there, elements of Delta blues musicians in there. Beefheart is pulling on musicians who seem to have a great knowledge of that music, but he is also leading them in a very restrictive and prescribed way. And so what to the casual listener sounds like chaos in the music is actually extremely ordered. There's very little improvisation in his music. It's much more about these strange, like clockwork patterns that interlock in a really strange way. I love this, and his approach to rhythm, his approach to the way the guitar works in rock and roll, the way the rhythm section works, is absolutely mind-blowing. And the influence, you know, on bands like Primus or even like British punk, it cannot be overestimated. I get a bit miffed with Brian Wilson being called the genius that he is, you know, and of course stuff that he did on Pet Sounds, stuff like Good Vibrations is wonderful stuff. But you remember around about the same time, Beefheart's making a track like Electricity. Electricity is it's incredible, it's sublime. I love this stuff. I think it's wonderful. Diddy Wah Diddy, when I heard that on a documentary about Frank Zappa and Beefheart, I thought, well, this is amazing. This guy really is the real deal. That's once I decided he was a real deal, because I think up to then I thought he might be a bit of a con man, or a bit of a, you know, a bit of a wild man fisher. Zappa signed up a guy that had mental health issues in the late 60s called Wild Man Fisher, and he made these very strange abstract albums which were sort of stream of consciousness, you know, madness really. And it seems very exploitative. You know, he signed up a bunch of you know, groupies essentially with the GTOs. And all this seems very, I don't know, it's all these things that he signed at that point. Zappa seems to be pushing his own agenda. You know, he also has Alice Cooper on the books, you know, and this is on Zappa's own label, Bizarre Records. And it seems that Zappa as a producer is doing none of these any favours really in terms of establishing these as artists. Now, after Beefheart establishing himself with these like Safe as Milk and Electricity and these incredible tracks, he then signs a deal with Zappa, and Zappa gives him sort of complete control. And a very strange thing happens. Beefheart then locks his band away in this house. They're surviving on very little food, so they're almost like there's malnutrition going on. And there he teaches them this new album, which is taught like, you know, orally. He's singing the tunes, they're going off and working on them. Their input seems to be negated because he rules them as like a dictator would. And after many months of living like this, living on beans, you know, a little bit like Pythagoras's cohorts, he's taken into a studio. Now, Zappa's idea was to record it in the house, and I think some of the recordings were done in there. Beefheart wouldn't use any headphones. So you have a situation where Zappa's producing this. Beefheart goes in after all this preparation, won't wear headphones, tries to sing along to the songs that he can't hear, creating this disjointedness between the vocal and the tracks, which I'm sure, you know, fans of Trout Mask Replica, which is the album that eventually came out under this name, will say is a work of genius, that all this stuff has made it absolutely wonderful.
Of a octofish, artifact on rose petals, in flesh petals and pots, fact in feast, in tubes, tubs, bulbs, ingest, incest, ingest, ingest, in feast, incest.
Now, when I first got Trout Mask Replica, what was my initial opinion was not that it was terrible. I was, you know, mature enough to not get put off by how weird it is, and it is weird. But I just felt that the production wasn't that great. I felt that Zappa had not used his usual meticulousness on this band, because he saw it as almost some sort of cultural experiment. That's what I felt Zappa treated it like. And that was not the right thing to do with Captain Beefheart. It creates something which, in terms of rock and roll history, has gone down as being one of the difficult albums, along with Metal Machine Music by Lou Reed. You know, there's a number of albums that sit there, you know, and people have to deal with them because they represent something, and we're all supposed to go, oh well, you know, this is amazing. But comparing it to the music that Beefheart made either side, you know, because after this he then does albums like Lick My Decals Off, and then moves to a period where he's very commercial, which the critics don't seem to like. They want him being weird. And I don't think Beefheart's genius was about being weird. I think he had a really incredible statement to make musically. He had a worldview that was absolutely unique, that required a great amount of skill to pull off. He developed a whole bunch of incredible musicians. A little bit, I think, he's almost like, for me, the rock and roll Ornette Coleman. And he has to be treated on his own grounds. And the thing that's always upset me is the music is incredible. And that Trout Mask Replica, it may be a work of genius in its own realm. It seems to fit into the Zappa world more than it fits into the Beefheart world. The cover looks like a Zappa cover. The production seems like there's something, with me loving Frank Zappa as much as I do and loving Beefheart, there is something not right about this album. I should love it, right? I no longer own a copy of it. I think I had it on cassette, and anything on cassette, I may still have it somewhere locked away. So I was listening on a cassette, and there were certain tracks that I thought were really good, really good, and I enjoyed them until I realised what he'd done on later albums. Now there's a whole bunch of this video for me has got a bunch of things I want to achieve. You know, there's a bunch of goals with this video that I want to achieve. One of them is to make the point that I don't think Trout Mask Replica is a masterpiece, and I don't think it's in anywhere near Beefheart's greatest album. I would say Safe of Milk, Lick My Decals Off, Spotlight Kid are all greater albums. They're more interesting, they've got a wider remit of what they do, and they're better for me because Beefheart had commercialised some of his ideas. Now of course in 1975 he hooks back up with Zappa, and they make the album Bongo Fury. Again, this should be one of Zappa's greatest albums, but when we list albums from the 1970s, I know Bongo Fury is a good album, and I know their fans will be here, but this is not overnight sensation. It is not Apostrophe. It is not One Size Fits All. It is not Shake Your Booty. This is an album that gets mentioned at the back of 70s Zappa albums. So there's something between these two that I find compelling, but just does not seem to work. I think that Beefheart shows up Zappa. I think Zappa was a genius, but he was a meticulous and knowing genius. And what seems weird on the surface, and that makes people want to put him in this bracket of sort of freaks and weirdos, was actually quite considered and cold. So that aspect of him is in this age where we want authenticity. Zappa gets points for being authentic, and that there was no compromise there, but it's all a little bit knowing. The critics like someone who is an innate genius, and Beefheart seems to be more like that. He seems more like an innate genius, and people who value free expression will love him, and I do love him. But I think that he knew what he was doing more than the legacy of Trout Mask Replica. Every story told about Trout Mask Replica is the fact that he was a dictator. They were starving. They didn't know what was going on. It was this went wrong. This wasn't right. And yet within all this brilliance came out. And I think this is always the problem in our contemporary culture, where we try and judge someone as an innate genius. We want it to sort of just emerge. We don't want to give them the credit of being the actual genius and knowing what they were doing. But I think Beefheart did know what he was doing. I really do. Now, in doing this video, I went back to the Beefheart albums I know. I listened to a few I don't know. Went back through them again, and I always thought that he was great right up to the end. So his last album, Ice Cream for Crow, I think is one of his greatest albums. I went back and revisited that period, and I ended up listening to an album called Shiny Beast, brackets Back Chain Puller, and I learned that this album Back Chain Puller was originally going to be called Back Chain Puller, and it was so strange that the label wouldn't put it out, or it never got a release. It's had a release now. So Shiny Beast was sort of came out of those sessions. I went and listened to Shiny Beast, and I have to be honest, this is an album that has taught me something about Beefheart, and has confirmed my idea that he was a knowing genius and he knew what he was doing. This album has stuff that says way out. The title track, Back Chain Puller, is absolutely as out there as anything on Trout Mask Replica. But then there's stuff that's quite commercial. There's hooks. He's playing with this. He knows what he's doing. There's a track, it's got a name something like My Mummy. When I see my mummy, I feel like a mummy, right? One of the most absurd titles that Beefheart could come up with. Go and listen to that tune. It's an absolute work of genius. It's so concise. There is no flappiness. There is no... it's economic in its composition. It's economic in the parts. The band is the arrangement's perfection. The way the things work together, and the way Beefheart's vocal operates within this world, and the way they move from section to section, and the whole thing is absolutely incredible. I believe that if Beefheart was seen as being this incredible artist that had this journey, and rather than being the guy that had that his second album was his greatest album, you know, that sort of rubbish that happens with so many artists, that has afflicted Brian Wilson as well, you know, that Pet Sounds was his work of genius, and then after 1966 he never went near it again, you know, which is probably true. But within Beefheart's case, his career, he never lets up. There's not a bad album there. He continually keeps developing. By the time he calls it a day with Ice Cream for Crow, he's like, you know, at the peak of his game. Then he retires and goes off into the desert and paints, and becomes a successful painter that is not like some guy doing semi-photo realist paintings of his mates, which is what you often get. This is serious modernist late 20th century art, you know. Absolutely an incredible artist and a one-off. I suggest that it would be Beefheart. It would be better if Shiny Beast was the album that everyone touted as his greatest, or Ice Cream for Crow, or Spotlight Kid, or any of these albums. But how about Shiny Beast? In my exploration of him again, I think that's the one. And if people are going, who's this big character, Captain Beefheart? You know, if young people were doing that, going, oh, well, the album you seem to have needs to be Trout Mask Replica. See the cover, which is a great cover, brilliant cover. Buying that album, or getting hold of it, going on Spotify and listening to it, and then trying to get your head around that, thinking that this is the greatest thing he ever did. It's a misrepresentation of one of the great artists of the rock era. It's a misrepresentation, and it doesn't get challenged because nobody wants to challenge the education, you know, not the educational elites, the musical elites, who have their own agenda, and they always want to be the one who has discovered it. They want to point out why Trout Mask Replica is so great. They're the ones who put in the work and got past it, and then they unlocked it, and they know why it's so good. And you don't know why it's so good, but it might be why it's so good. It's because what Beefheart does was not fully realised on that album. And it was not fully realised because the production wasn't that great. That Zappa's ideas were not in line with what Beefheart's genius was, and that showed up again when they got back together again on Bongo Fury. What's all this got to do with Dead Poets Society?
Music, oh, music such as charmeth sleep.
Now when thou wakest with thine own fool's eyes peep.
Sound music. Come, my queen, take hands with me, and rock the ground whereon these sleepers be.
shot, he got tissues, he's gone! He was duly impressed and was quick to suggest any sport with a pot had to be about the best as he jabbed his elbow in her.
Dukes and blindfolds. Do no wrong. Do no wrong. Come on, you're a fairy queen.
Ah, you can never bring in a wall. What say you, Bottom? Some guy or other
Oh, no, my dear Private Logan. Bottom's not a gangster. Now watch me. Some man or other must present Wall, and let him have some plaster or some loam or some rough cast about him to signify Wall, and let him hold his fingers thus, and through that cranny shall Pyramus and Thisbe whisper.
Why'd you paint me?
I need exercise.
Last week I did a video where I critiqued Iron Maiden's lyrics and tried to make out that they were as good as Bob Dylan's. Now, of course, this video is a huge celebration of Iron Maiden and how much I love them and how I'd rather listen to them, but I can still listen to them with the awareness that the lyrics are not on the same level as Bob Dylan. A lot of people didn't get that. It was done in a tongue-in-cheek way. I didn't expect them to get it. Some people did. It was quite a weird video, but I do think in terms of entertainment value of what I do, my weird approach to YouTube videos, I think it was, I was pretty good. I was pleased with what I did. I think it was quite funny, entertaining, told a story, and I'm sure people came out of it a little bit like my kids were like at the end of Dead Poets Society. Well, I enjoyed that, but I'm not too sure what it was about. Obviously, with the esoteric nature of my YouTube channel, a week later I come out with this video, which is like a sort of balance to that and is related to that. Now, the Dead Poets Society is about a bunch of kids going into the era of rock and roll. It plays out against the background of rock and roll, this era that's going to produce your Frank Zappas and your Bob Dylans and your Captain Beefheart's and your Brian Wilsons. It's played out against that. And it drops into that as sort of the idea of the romantic. There's a point in Dead Poets Society where when Professor Keating gets sacked and the headmaster comes in, he asks what there's been covered. He went, oh, he's been covered the romantics, you know, but they haven't covered the realists. Keating's a romantic. And in the romantic is something that's quite, what's the word? It's quite dangerous. We have the idea of the hero. We have the idea of the hero as being almost like a cursed figure. It's the idea that is in rock and roll. It's the Kurt Cobain or the Jim Morrison. It's the Byron-esque figure that is cursed by their sensitivity almost. Within that sensitivity is a want to drink life to the full, to live fast and die young. And these kids are taken up by that. And within the students, you see that there's all sorts of different characters. As although they are a microcosm of personalities. There's the visceral, hedonistic guy that calls himself Nawanda and paints himself like a Native American, and he womanizes. There's the boy that's in love, and he's in love with the girl who's very beautiful, and he woos her through the power of poetry. There's the guy that is he's quite straight-laced. There's two of those, one that wants to follow the rules and doesn't get it, but one that could be tainted. There's something in him that could be pits. There's the Ethan Hawke character, the guy that with the self-loathing that hates himself, a character that I have spoken about extensively. But the main character is the artist, and the artist is sort of doomed in this. And although it's obvious his father, now remember, when the rock and roll period comes out, as I've said, one of the greatest tracks of that period is The End by The Doors. And in that, Jim Morrison metaphorically kills his parents. This ushers in the era of rock as opposed to rock and roll. In this, the father kills the son, and it's made quite obvious that he kills the son. The son then puts on his sort of crown, the puck-like crown from Midsummer Night's Dream, You know, where he's had this one point when he was on stage being an artist where he felt alive. And so he seizes the day. And rather than get stuck into 10 years of military school that his dad wants him, he realises he's lived his life at that point because he was an artist. He opens the window and it's almost like his soul flies out into nature. And then he finishes it. Of course, this is a disaster for everybody. I find that very powerful. But the thing I didn't get when I was a kid was the words.
I close my eyes.
Yes?
And this image floats beside me.
Sweaty-toothed madman.
The sweaty-toothed madman with a stare that pounds my brain.
Oh, that's excellent. Now give him action. Make him do something.
His hands reach out and choke me.
That's wonderful, wonderful.
And all the time he's mumbling.
What's he mumbling?
Mumbling truth.
Yeah.
Truth like a blanket that always leaves your feet cold.
Forget them. Stay with the blanket. Tell me about that blanket.
You push it, stretch it, it'll never be enough. You kick at it, beat it, it'll never cover any of us. From the moment we enter crying to the moment we leave dying, it'll just cover your face as you wail and cry and scream.
The romantic poetry and the American poetry, there's a lot of Walt Whitman in here. And there's a lot of life-affirming poetry. But in affirming life, as living your life, you risk something. It deals with the great romantic dilemma that shot through rock and roll. The thing I realised was the words. As an older man, I think when I watched the film initially, I didn't understand the words. But now, at this age, I understand the words. So, as I get to the end of this video, hello there. I'm aware that it's been very quiet here, but somebody has turned up to place flowers on their loved ones. They've just pulled the car up and they've walked across. I feel like I'm encroaching on a moment, you know, really here. And so this moment that I'm in the middle of, that you can't see but I can, you can hear the car. There's people here and they're about to go into the grave of someone who's no longer here. And I'm very aware as well that the people I'm talking about are no longer here. They have passed on into myth. Hello there. They have passed on into myth as well. Both dying relatively young. I mean, Frank Zappa was dead by the age of 53, 4 years younger than I am now. And BEEFHEART not much older. They've gone. They are now sat in the realm of the dead. And I suppose when I go back to BEEFHEART, seeing his career as I have just done as being finite, you know, I think the thing that is great about BEEFHEART and what makes him different to Zappa is the same thing that is in the spirit of that poetry that is in the Dead Poets Society. It's a great yawp. It's a life-affirming yawp of an intuitive reaction to being alive, of grabbing it and not questioning it, of just letting it be. It is so full of the thing that made rock and roll so great, which is that youthful, visceral, hedonistic abandon that was at the beginning of this video. And the sweep of that means that, in a way, characters like Captain Beefheart and Frank Zappa, they couldn't have gone into old age. Neither could Jim Morrison or Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin or Kurt Cobain. And here I am. I'm literally sat on the edge of this right now. Sat on the edge. And I'm doing what these people are doing in the background here. In that I am paying tribute to people who have gone. That's what I do here. I'm very aware of it. And that's what I'm doing.
Gill. Bub and Gill. Bub and Gill. Bub in India. Bub and Matt. Bub in wool. Bub in a rug. Indoor bub. Bub in stitches. Glass bub. Bub in rope. Bub in jail. Bub in tent. Bub in pail. Bub on springs. Bubs. Brakes. Bub in pajamas. Bub's party with Gil and Matt and Bub in stitches. Erect Bub Gil's pill perfume roll.
Completely bedridden for a few weeks, Kurusamal moved in with us. It was Kurusamal who taught us what love was, what dependability was, what being hugged was. She would cook for us and bathe us outdoors in the bitter cold, with water she boiled in a huge pot on a wood fire.
If you want to get into beef art, that's what you've got to hear first. Not Trout Mask Replica. Absolute genius.